Heyo, how you doing? So, something I don't talk about much on stream is the fact that I'm a bit of a TCG fiend. Not in the watch me buy a booster box and fail to get a hit fiend, but the I will actively learn to play the game just to play the game kind of fiend. With the likes of Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon, I'll find a deck list online that interests me, then play that deck list and learn it as I go. Magic, on the other hand, I like to build my own decks, especially for EDH. And so that's what this video is. I want to share with you the game plan and thoughts that I put into my personal decks. I have a handful of decks I could pick, but for today, I want to share my Sultai aggro deck. Now, with this deck list, we have two commanders instead of one, those two being Cazur and Ukkima. Nothing like the bond between a man and his dog, or werewolf. And as powerful as working in a food chain combo line would have been, I'm not playing this as a UFC deck or a CDH deck. Instead, I wanted to focus on two things with this deck. From Cazur, we've got a +1/+1 counter angle setup, and from Ukkima, we've established our primary strike force, unblockable creatures. Thus, our game plan is defined. Knock the opponent out with commander damage, or just pummel their life to total to 0 with constantly growing unblockable threats. But raw combat damage is not our only means of seizing victory, and that's thanks to Finn. Finn grants us the ability to turn our skulking threats from annoying chip damage to a looming game over chance through poison counters granted by Murek Nightblade. Like I said, our primary attackers are going to be unblockable creatures, not creatures that are difficult to block like flyers or menacers, but creatures that just straight up say can't be blocked in the rule box or have a keyword that does so. So, Meringue River Prowler? In. Ink Fathom Witch? In. Silent Call Creeper? For like 4 turns, but in. Azorius Knight Arbiter. It actually, we can't do that one. It's not in our color identity. Blighted Agent? Now, God, we have standards here. For our +1/+1 counters, we of course have ways of getting as much mileage as we can from placing one counter through adding additional counters with it, or just straight up doubling up on it. Cards such as Winding Constrictor and Cursed Wombat provide additional counters, while Corpse Jack's Menace just straight provides double the amount. Let's break that down a little bit. Here's a scenario. We get Changeling Outcast to slip in and hit our opponent, triggering Cazur to place a counter. Constrictor, Wombat, and Corpse Jack seize this counter and trigger. Order matters here. If we resolve the effects in this order of Corpse Jack, Constrictor, Wombat, then we only put 4 counters onto the Outcast. But if we resolve it in this order, Constrictor, Wombat, Corpse Jack, then we instead put 6 counters on Outcast. Anytime we have the option to, we want Corpse Jack to be resolving last in the chain to get as much mileage as possible. We also can't solely rely on Cazur to get those +1/+1 counters on the board by himself. So we do have means of providing counters on ETB thanks to Renata, and Ornroof Roofs provides counters to all our troops when it attacks. Then we have Westgate Regent, who gets counters based on how much damage he deals. Not much of a team player, really. Fane though, he's a team player, provided you can pay in blood. And by blood, I of course mean child sacrifice, sacrificing the weakest link. By sacrificing a creature to its first ability, Fane lets us place 2, potentially 8, +1 counters on a me creature. Fractal Harness can serve as its own body so long as we pump a little more mana into it as we cast it, or as a source of gains for any of our Strike Force members. Now, Invigorating Surge, meanwhile, can turn innocuous chip damage into a fatal blow at a moment's notice. Like in this scenario, an opponent is at 6 commander damage inflicted by Ukkima. Ukkima has 6 counters and is about to make contact. Constrictor and Corpse Jack are on the field. Cast Invigorating Surge targeting Ukkima. The first +1 counter from that spell becomes 4 counters. Ukkima is now at 12 power. Next portion of Invigorating Surge occurs, and doubling counters in Magic is just putting that many counters on a target, which means Corpse Jack and Constrictor trigger. So instead of placing 10 counters on Ukkima, you're placing 22 additional counters and thus granting Ukkima 34 power. For those keeping track at home, on top of the 6 commander damage already inflicted, that opponent is walking away from this interaction with 40 total commander damage dealt by Ukkima. A player loses if they've taken 21 or more points of combat damage from a single commander. GG, now watch as the rest of the table tells me to face the wall and think about the rabbits before putting me down. We also have means of increasing the count of our +1/+1 counters through Proliferate. Thornbird can proliferate so long as it deals chip damage. Canker Bloom lets us choose from either spot removal or proliferate. Drowning Ichor is a removal that also just proliferates as a bonus. Ripples of Potential though, that lets us avoid board wipes by phasing out all our creatures we targeted for its proliferating effect. Then cards like Herald of the Secret Stream and Murek Nightblade grants benefits from a creature having a +1 counter on them. Herald turns any creature in our deck into a member of our strike force by making creatures with a +1/+1 counter unblockable, while Nightblade gives those same creatures Death Touch, and thus enable our alternate win outlet in combination with Finn. Meanwhile, a card like Unforgiving One can bring back our troops from the graveyard based on the number of our modified creatures, aka our creatures with +1 counters on them. Rather than just get card draw off of instants and sorceries thanks to being in blue, or heaven forbid that enchantment, I thought it'd be more fun to get our card draw while also forwarding our game plan of combat damage through the use of coastal piracy effects. We'll have a consistent stream of cards entering our hand as we constantly chip away at our opponent's life. Then our non-combat oriented draw effects come in the form of Cazur's Gambit, which draws us 2 cards and is another proliferate effect to buff our attackers. Inspiring Coal, both mass card draw and another means of evading board wipes that destroy or damage by granting our creatures indestructible. That's right. We turn all our creatures we drew cards off of. Fathom Mage. Leave a penny, take a penny, or rather, leave a +1 counter, take a card from the top of your library. Primal Empathy. If by chance we don't have the highest power among creatures at the table, we get to place down a +1/+1 counter on one of our creatures instead. Castle Lockthwain. At the low cost of 3 mana and life equal to your hand size, you can draw a card. If you're not careful though, you can kill yourself, keep yourself safe on accident if your hand is too full. Spot removal and board wipes. Those are going to be our primary methods of getting rid of stuff on our opponent's side of the field. This includes cards such as Withering Torment, Beast Within, Assassin's Trophy, Trigon Predator, Sultai Charm, Putrefy, and Resculpt, as our means of dealing with permanents on the field by either destroying or exiling them. Drowning Ichor and Lethal Exploit are able to bypass indestructible creatures, with Lethal Exploit hitting harder the more modified creatures we have on the field. Signature Slam can provide a +1/+1 counter to at least one creature, before having all your modified creatures just absolutely dogpile one opposing creature. Back for More can recur something like Junji, who has some handy death triggers, then have him fight something and potentially trade against it. But of course, we're in blue, which means we have some counterspells. There's of course Counterspell, included as well as Stubborn Denial, which can be more potent with a big creature on the field. But we also have some fun with Repulsive Mutation, which can buff if paid to, but for the most part is a 2 mana counterspell so long as we have a buffed creature on the field. As for our board wipes, Languish can help wipe out decks that go wide and short, while Gix Command can wipe pesky walls from the board. I'm looking at you, Dorn and Arcades. Whereas Oversimplify can just exile the field and gives everyone a Fractal as compensation. Though this can backfire when going against decks that go wide though. Deadly Cover-Up can be slightly theft if you collect evidence while casting it, because of one simple thing. Nowhere in it does it say non-basic, which means if you're playing against a monocolor deck who has a basic land in the yard for whatever reason, I'm looking at you, green decks with Harrow in the list, you might make an enemy for the next few games. Then there's Wave Goodbye, which is mostly an asymmetrical board wipe though, but in a more fair and synergistic way than something like Cyclonic Rift. In our ramp, we have some pretty common staples. You've got Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, and the Talismans in Sultai. Then you've got Farseek and Kodama's Reach, which are pretty common ramp spell options in green. And our more out there pieces of ramp are Young Yu, who synergizes with our +1/+1 angle by turning our buff creatures into mana dorks, and so does Fane, but in a bit of a more trade-offer sort of way. Then we get to a pseudo pet card of mine, which is Dig Up. Notice those sections and brackets? Well, that's because this card has a keyword, Cleave, and by paying that cleave cost instead of its normal cost, you can turn a simple ramp spell that grabs a basic into a tutor to dig for a potential finish towards the end of the game, like Finn, or Nightblade, or Languish, if you're that desperate. Meanwhile, our suit of lands are pretty standard for a tricolor deck. You've got Shocks and Slow lands, your basic multicolored lands as well, and our utility lands has some interesting ones. You've got a Mystic Sanctuary, brings back any instant or sorcery you need, Bodriga Bog for Graveyard Hate, the aforementioned Castle Lockthwain for card draw, Llanowar Reborn has Graft, which can pass on a +1/+1 counter on entering creatures. And then Karn's Bastion for its Proliferate effect, Reliquary Tower so we can have more than 7 in hand. Demolition Field to pop problematic opposing lands. Rogue's Passage to grant something unblockable. And Lit Yara Mirror Lake to clone a desired creature we control. I will admit, all decks I build have at least some flaws in them, whether that be a meager amount of ramp or limited pieces of interaction. I do not care that my decks are not perfect, so long as the deck is fun to play, I'll consider that a success. But I do want to talk about the shortcomings so that if you, the viewer, want to play this deck, you'd know what pitfalls to keep in consideration. Board wipes. Plain and simple, this deck needs creatures to function, and if those creatures all get popped by board wipe, your pacing can easily shift from a good run to trudging along with a weight on your back as you try and rebuild. Tunnel vision. As fun as just pressuring your opponent through combat is, you are still playing a multiplayer format. You can focus down one person, but then what are you going to do about the other 2 players that most likely have board wipes or some combo piece in their land? My suggestion? Just pick a god and pray that you make it to your next untap step. Propaganda effects. Norn's Annex, Windborn Muse, Baird, Elephant Grass. Yeah, all those cards and any other similar ones that can force us to pump the brakes on our plan of attack. Not good. Another bit of weakness is how dependent this deck is on combat damage. From +1/+1 counter distribution off of Cazur to our draw engines, commander damage off of Ukkima. Hell, Trigon Predator needs the combat damage to pop artifacts and enchantments. So any sort of fog effect can in theory stop this deck's game plan in its tracks. Man, if only there was a card that could let us ignore fog effects. Where does Yu-Gi-Oh card come from? And that's that? Honestly, for a first time deck list video, it's gonna be rough around the edges no matter what I do, and I'm fine with that. I gotta learn a few new editing skills while working on this video, hopefully, and I can put that knowledge to use in future deck lists. But enough of that. Thank you for sticking around, and I hope you guys are okay with me yapping about one of my hobbies. Regardless, I hope you have a good rest of your morning, day, night, or afternoon, and I'll see you guys next time. It's IGN.